Greetings everyone, Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making, and in today's episode we're going to be looking at Kitty Hawk's UH-1Y Venom in 1/48 scale. This is the second part in the trio of Marine Corps helicopters that I built, and I had kind of heard some horror stories about these Kitty Hawk kits, and so I was a little nervous going into this, and it's definitely a mixed bag, and I'll explain that further on. But initially, we start off with the cockpit, and this is gonna be just like pretty much every other aircraft helicopter model kit out there. But this one has a rather complex and busy cockpit slash cabin. And Kitty Hawk provides you with quite a lot of detail out of the box. You could certainly go down the route of adding, like photoetch, the pre-colored photo etch to the cockpit and things like that. But honestly, for the most part, I think it actually does a pretty good job out of the box. The only thing that we decided to add, myself and the client, for this particular build was to do photo etch seat belts, and mainly just because you don't get you actually do get some photo etch seat belts in the kit, but only for the pilot and co-pilot seat. You don't get any for the back cabin where the majority of the seats are, and those all have seat belts. So got a set of Edward photo etch seat belts for both the cockpit and the cabin. Everything else, though, you can pretty much assemble out of the box, and it looks pretty good. So here we've just gone through assembling the pilot seats, doing the all the various controls in the cockpit, and getting everything ready. As you can see, the floor has a lot of great surface detail on there. All the different panels and fasteners, rivets, things like that. Quite a lot of detail packed into there. And there are a few other things that we need to glue up to kind of build up the bulk of the interior, and like all the bulkheads and everything, and where the there's also two areas that have like all the avionics and things like that. And so I do a lot of, like, for example, this box here, like I glue it together and then I dry fit it into the floor just to make sure that the alignment is correct. Here are the cabin seats. Now the cabin seats have it's two parts. You have the back and then the seat, and they have these weird triangle things on the side that are supposed to glue up together, and it's supposed to represent like this cloth material that hangs down on the side of the seat. However, it ends up with this really unsightly seam running down the middle that would be pretty much, I mean, not impossible to clean up, but it's way too much work. So I just cut those off and just replaced it with some sheet styrene to represent the cloth that would be on the side of the seats there. And not like 100% accurate, because there'd be kind of a little bit of I mean, it's cloth, so there'd be a little bit of some droop and drape to the material. But I think in this scale it works out pretty good. Also, there's a lot of cabin seats. So once we have everything all prepped and ready to go, we can get it painted. So I got it all primed up in black, and we're going to be doing some chipping on the floor of the cabin, similar to how I've done in the CH-53 builds as well. So we're laying down a coat of Vallejo aluminum here, and I'm just pretty much coating the entire thing, because I want to make sure that I can chip wherever I need to and not have any bare spots. And then we go ahead and give it a layer of the Ammo MIG heavy chipping fluid. This sprays on a little bit grainy unless you thin it out, but I kind of prefer the graininess to it because it helps add a little bit more randomness to when you actually go to do the chipping portion. Next, we're going to do yellow green. This is Tamiya paint, and this is going to be our primer that the aircraft would be painted in. And so we go ahead and give this a nice good coat. I feel like the Tamiya acrylics actually work really good over the MIG chipping fluid, and I haven't had any issues with them. So at this point, basically what we do is we wet the surface, and then with a stiff brush we kind of go in and start stippling and rubbing and trying to create activating that chipping fluid and pulling up some of this yellow paint here, and trying to concentrate along the panels and the fasteners, and generally where you would imagine soldiers' boots would be, and people coming in and out of the helicopter here. So it's just a matter of working our way over, identifying those areas that we want to chip. Obviously, looking at reference images is important, but also just kind of, you can kind of visualize it and say, like, okay, I could conceivably see people moving about in this area. So that's just kind of how I'm going about it. And then so what we're going to do is we're going to give it another layer of chipping fluid, and now we're going to go with a layer of NATO black. So this is going to kind of represent the non-stick material that they would put down on the floor. Going to go ahead and make sure we got a good, nice, solid coat here, and so that we can then start the process all over again. So we wet it and then attack it with a stiff brush. And I apologize that the glare from the water kind of makes it hard to see where it's actually being pulled up, but I promise you it is. But really trying to concentrate in the same areas that we were with the yellow paint. And so now we're going to get both the yellow paint and the metallic paint showing through, and just kind of show the multi-layer, the multiple layers of the chipping and damage to the surface that it would take. So again, just trying to concentrate on areas where the crew's feet would be, where they'd be moving about, where they'd be moving objects, whatever they might be putting into the helicopter around. Because the interior of the helicopter is basically just all black, I'm actually using a couple of different shades of black in here. So the majority of it is painted in NATO black, which is really kind of like a dark brownish gray color. But now I'm coming in on some of the electronics and instruments with more of a pure black. And this just helps create a little bit of a visual difference between the different color blacks without it necessarily being totally strong and in your face, like, hey, these are different. So all of the controls get the black, the instruments get the black, and overhead panel and things like that. On the pilot seats, we're just going to hit the cushions with a little bit of dark olive drab, just to represent the cushion. And now we can give everything just a nice dry brush of light gray. This just helps, hit all the highlights and kind of highlight some of those raised details, as well as it helps just generally tie everything together. I'm going to give everything this dry brush. We go over pretty much everything in the cockpit, and it just helps bring everything together. Even though there's slightly different shades, there's different things going on, they all end up with the same dry brush, and it just really helps tie everything together. Kitty Hawk does provide decals for the raised details on the instrument panels, and you could take the time to paint the raised details. The details are really nice. And but I wanted to try out the decals, see how they worked. So I put on some of my Solvaset first, put the decal down, and then I'll do some more Solvaset on top. And that really did the trick. It didn't take much more effort than that to get those decals to conform. So I did this on all the instrument panels, the overhead panel, and pretty much everything in the cockpit, and it worked out pretty good. So here we're adding the Edward photoetch seat belts. There's for the pilot and co-pilot seat, there were 5 pieces, I think, that you had to put on, 2 shoulder belts, 2 lap belts, and then the center belt. For all of the cabin seats, it was just 4 pieces. So it took a little while to get all these pieces on there, because you have to glue one end first, let it dry, then bend it over, glue the other end, let it dry. So it does take a little bit of time, but in the end, it's totally worth it, because it just really helps add that next level busyness to the cabin. And since we're going to have the back cabin open, it was kind of really important to have all this going on. So at this point, we can really start getting everything assembled here and getting the cockpit ready to get closed up. So here we're just putting some of the cabin seats on. There are a couple areas where I will need to add a little bit of extra paint there, since during my painting process, some of those areas were covered. And but again, I just really love the look of the seat belts here, much better than having these seats be empty. So at this point, we're going to start constructing all the components in the cabin. And one of the things that struck me about this kit is just how much plastic goes into the inside of this helicopter. And as I was building this up, I was kind of getting concerned that, oh man, this might be difficult to get. I hope there aren't any issues with the cockpit, the fuselage halves closing around all of this plastic, because there's a lot, and you have to make sure it gets all lined up correctly, and so that it all fits correctly. And here we got the instrument panel going on. This was kind of an interesting way that they did it, and it requires a little bit of pressure to get that glue to set, but once it goes, it's good. So this is the back bulkhead, and but I mean, everything else, so here you can see the actual roof is put on. I have added some weights into the bottom of the helicopter. I was concerned with it being a tail sitter. And so here's kind of the moment of truth. And surprisingly, this all fits really well. I was very impressed with how well and snug the cockpit fit into the fuselage halves. Like I mentioned, I had heard that there were horror stories about the fit of this kit. But I can say it, as far as the interior goes, it fit almost flawlessly. Once I got everything lined up and in the correct spot, it fit where it was supposed to. So that was kind of like a big burden lifted off my shoulders, was being able to get that point and get it all fit. The kit does give you the chance of having both engine bays open and display. They do give you 2 engines. They definitely need additional detailing to make him look properly busy. For this one, we were not doing the engines open, and so I've got the engine bays locked in there. Those were, I think, each engine bay was 8 pieces, I think. So there's quite complex, but they fit in there pretty good. Here's the nose section. The chin windows, they fit in from the inside, so they can't be added later on. So I pre-masked them first, then put them in. I just don't want any chance of them popping off, while they were inside the helicopter and then not being able to get them added on. Here's where we start running into some fit issues. So these are the engine intakes, and these were a huge challenge. Lots of sink marks, lots of ejector pin marks in very visible places, and poor fit. So these required a lot of sanding, a lot of filling in order to get them to look even halfway decent. And again, there's no detail inside the intake, so you don't get to see any, like, the engine first stage compressors, things like that. It's just, it doesn't exist in there. So that was kind of a struggle. Here we are doing the tail boom. Fun fact: the sprue for this kit is identical to the one that comes in the UH-1Y Viper kit. They actually share the same kit here, so it's kind of neat that these helicopters are really based off the same basic airframe. The eyebrow panel, or the eyebrow windows, they have a green tint to them, so I just hit it with some clear Tamiya paint, and pretty happy with how that turned out. Adding rest of the engine components here. This all fit pretty good. Not a lot of issues here. These engine panels, they were a little bit of a struggle. They really are meant to be displayed open and not closed. So getting them to fit required some trimming and test fitting before I was happy with it. And even then, I still needed to use a little bit of filler to get them to fit properly. Exhaust going on, and finally we can put the tail boom on. And this really kind of builds up the bulk of the helicopter. You will notice there's a lot of openings in the hull of this helicopter, and that all gets filled with photoetch, and we'll look at that in a little bit. But here's the moment of truth to make sure it's not a tail sitter, and I'm glad I added that weight in the front, because I think that really helped. Another area I was concerned about was the fit of this canopy window. But it actually turned out to be rather nice fitting. I just made sure I glued the top part first, let it dry, then glued the bottom part. And you kind of have to force it a little bit to get it to sit in there properly. But once you do, and the glue cures, then it's solid and you're good to go. So that was another burden lifted off my shoulders. I am using Edward pre-cut masks for the canopy masking. This was a lifesaver. Very large, very delicate details on the canopies. I didn't want to try and potentially ruin them running my knife along there. So these masks really came in handy, and they fit perfectly. Zero issue with them. Very nice. Highly recommended. And so yeah, got those all on. We can start putting on the rest of the clear parts here. These were all pretty snug fit. A lot of them were even just kind of a snap fit. You had to snap them into place. So pretty pleased with that. I think the engineering here was pretty good, at least with the clear parts. And that was a big concern, because there are so many clear parts on this helicopter. I was worried about those not fitting properly. But rest assured that, at least in my example, they did fit pretty good. The front sensor going on. And now we can start adding all of the photo etch grills. So this is where this kit really shines. Whoever designed the photo etch for this kit, and it is included in the kit, the photo etch was flawless. It fit every opening exactly perfectly. And I mean, the tolerances were just so incredibly tight, and yet everything fit exactly where it was supposed to. Even on the more complex ones that had like curves and bends to them, they just fit so well. And I was blown away doing this with just how well everything fit. And there was a lot of these grills that had to go on all over the helicopter front and back, and every single one of them went on flawlessly. I have zero complaints about the photo etch in this kit. And that was kind of like a breath of fresh air in this kit. So now we can temporarily attach the main doors here so that we can get ready for painting. Additionally, I did want to add a little bit of detail to the rotor head, and it's not like the CH-53 that I recently did that required so much work to get the rotor head detailed up. The rotor heads on these helicopters are actually quite simple. So there's only just a few little details that I had to add. So we had this little center post we're adding, had to drill holes in it so that it could accept some hoses that would be running from the center post into each of the blades. So here I'm just inserting some, I think this is 28 or 0.28 gauge floral wire into the holes that I drilled, just securing it with a little bit of super glue. And it took a little bit of time to make sure I got this right. And reference pictures were actually quite hard to come by for this particular area of the helicopter. But once I found, I ended up finding a pretty good one that really gave me what I needed to know. So we have to do a couple little bends in the wires here just to get them to look correct, because they actually don't go down the center line of the blade. They actually sit off to the side of the blade. But once I got them bent the right way, then it was just a matter of trimming them to the appropriate length so that they could just barely fit underneath the blade, but obviously not interfere with how the blade attaches to the center portion here. So here we can start getting the blades attached, and it's a two-piece part. You have an upper piece and a lower piece. They just glue together like that and sandwich that center part in the middle. So ends up being pretty strong. Now we're going to add a couple more these little braces, and again, this is just using some strip styrene, and so each blade gets one, and so they actually kind of start down at the center post and then move up to where. And I apologize, I don't know the terminology of all the components on the rotor blade, but they just needed to be trimmed up and they're good to go. So now we can start our painting. For this, I'm going to be using the Vallejo surface primer, mainly just because I knew I wasn't going to be doing any masking on the actual paint job itself, and so I wasn't going to be worried about paint lifting up. So we're just going to go ahead and give everything a good, nice coat of the Vallejo primer. There are a few hard to reach places. So you just have to be careful. I had this set to a kind of a low pressure because I didn't want to flood some of the areas that I would need to kind of get into the recesses with. So it took a little while, it took a couple coats, but we got there eventually and got a nice good coat. Also, there is a ton of surface detail on this kit. And again, I didn't want to flood everything and kind of, fill in a lot of that detail. So here we're going to go with our main color and give a couple nice thin coats of this as well. Again, going really thin with the paint here, just really wanted to try and preserve a lot of that beautiful surface detail that this kit provides. And so this color is going to be used on all of the underside and vertical surfaces. And then we're hitting it with some dark sea gray for all of the upper surfaces for the two-tone camouflage. I really love the Marine Corps two-tone camouflage. I think it looks really good, and especially on these helicopters. And I decided instead of masking just to freehand this. And I'm pretty happy I did. I think it turned out really well. And so we're just going over all of the horizontal surfaces. So that's the roof above the engines, on the tail boom, and the nose of the helicopter. So just making sure we get all this good, nice coverage with a solid demarcation between the two colors. And really quite happy with how this turned out, and really like the colors used here. So I think there's just the right amount of contrast between the two colors. Next up, we're going to hit everything with a gloss coat. So this is going to prepare the kit for decals and weathering. Again, going thin, a couple thin coats, gave us the look we're going for here. When I do sessions like this, if there isn't an obvious way to mount the model so that I don't have to handle it, I'll usually do 2 sessions. I'll do, so for example, I'm holding the tail boom right now, so I'll paint everything ahead of the tail boom, let it cure, come back in a couple hours, then do the back end, the tail boom where I was holding it before. Client chose a very attractive paint scheme on this, and really kind of lives up to the Venom name with this really, really cool, snake emblem on here. Really, personally, I think this is the best looking of the venerable Huey helicopter. It looks big, it looks mean, it looks powerful, and then you add on these really cool snake markings, and it just makes it even cooler. So this will be a high vis scheme, so all of our markings will be won't be the standard low vis stuff here, which is fine. I'm happy with that. I think it looks really great. So decals go on. These are the kit decals, and they were very thin, reacted really well to the Solva set, and pretty much offered me 0 issues whatsoever. So props to Kitty Hawk for the great decals. Really like the high vis markings. So now we give everything, once all the decals are down, we give everything another quick coat of gloss just to seal in and protect those decals. We're not going to be doing tons of weathering on this helicopter. Mainly it's just going to consist of a panel wash. So I'm using a panel wash called Interior Panel Wash. So this is kind of a dark brownish gray. And again, because I didn't want to we weren't going too heavy on the weathering for these helicopters. This was really just to, suggest that the panel lines and the rivets and the fasteners are there without necessarily like going super dirty. So once the wash dries, it's just a matter of taking some paper towel or a cloth or some Q-tips and wiping away the excess, leaving the wash in the recesses and details. And so this wash was done all over, both shades of gray and even into the black upper part there, just to keep it all tied together. And now we can hit it with a matte coat. I thinned this matte coat down mainly just because I actually didn't want to go full like flat matte on this. I wanted a little bit of shine to still show through, just because real aircraft still, even though they have a matte painted, or they are matte painted, they still have a little bit of a shine. So I really want to try and portray that here by going really thin with the matte coat, which helps it to be not quite so strong. So once the matte coat is down and cured, we can pop off these doors here, which were temporarily affixed, and we can start removing some of the canopy masking. Now, like I said, Edward masking worked perfectly and had no issues with overspray or paint creeping underneath them. So really, really pleased with how these look. And I did have a little bit of dust that got into the cabin, but I was able to get in there with a Q-tip and get it pretty much cleaned up, so without issues. So yeah, those all turned out pretty nice. Pretty happy with it. Really happy with how the green tint worked on these upper windows here. It's kind of hard to see in the lighting, but in person they looked fabulous, and you could really see that green tint, and pretty happy with that. So with all the canopies removed, we can really just start. It's really just a matter of adding all the little final details at this point. So here we are adding the weapons pylons, and you can see I've added a bunch of the antennas and aerials to the kit as well. There were a lot of antennas and wire cutters and things that needed to be added to this. I prefer doing all that like towards the end, just because I know my fat fingers will will knock something off invariably. So we can attach the doors in the open position. So these were just fixed on with a little bit of super glue, and they fit right on there. And then finally we can add the rocket pods. So these were all painted off separately, so I apologize I don't have any footage of that, but the assembly of these was it's just 2 halves and then the front and the back, pretty simple. And finally we can get the rotors on. So again, I love the simplicity of the rotors on this thing. But so here we go. The kit is now done, and we have our finished Venom. So my overall thoughts on the kit are, if you want to build a 1/48 scale Venom, it's the only way to go. If you can find the kit, I actually recommend getting it. It does have fit issues. It is plagued by. It was almost like the helicopter was designed by two different teams and working on, because some parts just fit so well and so flawless, and then other parts didn't. But in the end, if you put in the work, it turns out a fantastic looking helicopter. And again, like I said before, I think this is the best looking version of the Huey. It just screams power and aggression, and I love it. So if you've made it this far, thanks for watching, and appreciate it. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and let me know what you think in the comments down below. And I really like hearing from you. I like interacting with you. And I also want to give a shout out to my patrons who help support this channel and make content like this possible. So thank you, and we'll see you on the next video.